Hi, everyone. My name is Nick Marshall, and I'm the manager of exhibitions and programs at George Eastman Museum. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight for our conversation with artist Kota Ezawa and the Ron and Donna Fielding director at George Eastman Museum, Dr. Bruce Barnes. The museum would like to thank NEH Cares and Art Bridges for providing invaluable support for this talk, as well as many of our other virtual programs over the last 4 months or so. They've really enabled us to put together an exciting and robust set of programs to share with you all. We'd also like to thank our members for their continued support during these challenging times. It really truly has been amazing to see so many of you adapting to the virtual realm with us as we've shifted our public programs to online events, and really appreciate letting us work through the learning curve of a new medium, and we really appreciate that. We invite all of our attendees to ask questions at any point throughout tonight's discussion. At the bottom of your screen, you should see an icon for Q&A. If you click this, you can submit your questions through there, and then at the end of the conversation, we'll go over as many of them as you have time for, or sorry, as we have time for, including the Q&A. Tonight's presentation is going to last about an hour. The chat function, which is the other icon at the bottom of your screen, is open. So if you're having any technical difficulties, please feel free to reach out to us through there and let us know. Or if you'd like to just say hello, let us know where you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear from you. So again, questions for the artist, go through the Q&A. If you want to just say hi, please feel free to use the chat. We are recording today's talk, so if you would like to watch it again, or if you want to share it with friends and colleagues, the video will be uploaded on the Eastman Museum's YouTube page within the next week. And now I'd like to turn it over to the Ron and Donna Fielding director, Dr. Bruce Barnes.
Good evening. I'm thrilled to be able to host all of you virtually. There aren't a lot of good things to be said about the COVID epidemic, but one of the things that has been wonderful is that we've actually started reaching a larger, broader audience for some of these artist talks, because we're able to reach people across the country in a way that we didn't used to. And we're grateful to our members, as well as both Art Bridges and the National Endowment for the Humanities, for helping to make this possible. It's my great pleasure this evening to have a discussion with Kota Ezawa. Throughout his work, Kota Ezawa has explored appropriation and formal simplification of images that are taken from current events, from photography, and from popular culture. Since his animated moving image work, The Simpson Verdict, was created in 2002, he has created digital videos, slideshows, lightboxes, and works on paper, in which he has appropriated photographic images and transformed them into highly simplified renderings in his very distinctive style. Kota Ezawa was born in Germany, where he began his undergraduate studies at the renowned Kunstakademie in Düsseldorf with Namjoon Paik and Nan Hoover, before relocating to the Bay Area in California. His work has been featured in numerous solo exhibitions, including at the St. Louis Art Museum, Vancouver Art Gallery, Albert Knox Art Gallery in Buffalo, and the Chrysler Museum of Art in Norfolk, Virginia. His work has also been included in group exhibitions at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York on several occasions, the Art Institute of Chicago, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art on several occasions, the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Center in Washington, D.C., the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and the Museo Thyssen-Bornemisza in Madrid, among many others. From late September to early November, Deborah Ronnen Fine Art, the George Eastman Museum, and the Memorial Art Gallery are collaborating to exhibit his works. Deborah Ronnen Fine Art is presenting his critically acclaimed animated work, National Anthem, which we'll be speaking about today, and related lightboxes and watercolors. And the George Eastman Museum and the Memorial Art Gallery are each showing a different Lightbox from his History of Photography Remix series, which will also be one of the principal points of discussion today. It's my pleasure now to introduce Kota Ezawa.
Hi. Hi, thanks for having me.
So Kota, this I believe is a photograph of a gallery that is showing History of Photography Remix in its original form, which was as a slideshow.
Precisely, yeah. This is installation shot of an installation at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts. This is not the first showing of the exhibition, but this was how it was shown from the get-go with a 35mm slide projector and glass-mounted slides.
And as I recall, you're telling me you very much like the fact that you could hear when you were in the gallery the functioning of the slide carousel as part of the experience.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of us remember what slide projectors that did. There was the sound of the projector so the piece kind of had a soundtrack. And then also the slides, if you remember, they were never clean. There was always dust, speckles, and other artifacts. It's so different from the very sanitized digital projections that we see nowadays. And also the light, I think, of the projector lamp is very different than these LED projections that we're used to now.
Yeah, and I also think it's very different from what we're about to experience when you show us this work, both in that there won't be any sound accompanying the slideshow that you'll run through, but also there is something quite different about the projected image on the screen and what we're seeing on our monitors.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm not a purist. I really liked that through art projects, you can kind of prolong the lifespan of a medium. Like right when Kodak stopped producing 35mm slide film, a lot of artists actually started making slide projector shows. I feel just to celebrate the format before it would disappear. But on the other hand, I'm not against digital or against all. Now I see people making drawings on iPads, and I'm not at all against that. It's just, I tend to want to use both.
Right, and I'll just say one word before you show it, which is the George Eastman Museum tends to be a little bit of a purist with respect to projected images, and also I guess with respect to photographs. And we're currently showing on a monitor in the museum what you're about to show us, and it's being shown on a monitor. With I wish we could have shown it using a slide carousel. It would not really have been practical. It would have created a lot of challenges. And I think it's spectacular on the monitor, but there's something about the original that I think was very special.
Okay, so should I start it?
Please.
Yeah, we're watching this almost like a film right now, but I think of it really also like almost like an ambient piece where conversations can happen at the same time. And the way it's shown is on a loop. So if you miss one image, you can wait 3 minutes and then it'll come back again.
Kota, with that in mind, would you let it just continue to scroll through while we have a conversation? What do you think of that?
Yeah, that's totally possible if I can figure out how to do this technically, but shouldn't be.
Oh,
Yeah, there we go. We're back
Great.
at the beginning.
fantastic, great. So, why did you decide to go with a slideshow format? I don't mean specifically with slides, but with this format where you're showing a set of images for a certain amount of time. And it's interesting as you get to know the work, how one's experience of the time changes, frankly. But what led you to that approach?
I mean, there's a very kind of simple answer to it. This piece I started it in 2003, 2004. I made it over a couple of years. And up until that moment, I only made videos. I was kind of married to the format of videos. And at that time, I was offered a project room show at the Santa Monica Museum of Art. And I asked the curator, what you want me to show? And they said, you can show whatever you want. But they assumed I would show a video. But I took this freedom that they gave me to give the assignment to myself to show something other than a video. So this was really the first piece I've done that was not a video. Although we're seeing it as a video right now. At the same time, I also started to teach. I was teaching my first year of teaching at the California College of the Arts, and I made slideshows for my students. And just kind of based on that, I felt I could utilize this format. And I remember I took a slide from my slideshow for the students, scanned it in the computer lab, and then redrew it with my process, brought it to a photo lab, and then had a 35mm slide made from my own drawing. And that felt like, it felt really gratifying to kind of take something out of the world of slides and then manipulate it and put it back into a slide frame.
Yeah, as I've seen it, you know, my experience of it has evolved. And the first way that I saw it was actually, there's a book that's published, I guess that's now out of print, that is essentially the same set of images. Maybe maybe it's the same set of images here, but 2 more images than were in the original slideshow, perhaps. But it's essentially the same set of images. And you know, with the book, obviously, you can spend as much time as you want on the images. So that was my first experience of it. And originally, I thought about it as, you know, were you trying, when doing this as a slideshow, to challenge the viewer to identify what specific photographs were? Was that, you know, part of what was in your mind?
I don't know that was my intention. But I saw that happening. So one museum that also showed the original slideshow is the Met, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, in a show called Photography on Photography, if I remember right. And I went to see the show, there was no opening that I can remember. I went to see the exhibition, and there was my slideshow, and there was a bench in front of it, and I saw a few visitors sitting on the bench and playing kind of the guessing game, like that's Ansel Adams. But I feel nobody, not even you, would be able to identify each individual image, because some of them are personal photographs or photographs that friends of mine took, along with very famous photographs by Walker Evans and the likes. So it's not the sole, I don't know, the kind of the why an artwork is done, for me, comes oftentimes much later. And when you're making a work, you oftentimes kind of stumble in darkness, and what you're actually doing is only revealed later on.
Right. Well, I certainly believe that that's the case. One of the things that I have found is now, when I watch it and when I think about it, it becomes, first of all, because you depart on numerous occasions from just showing a famous photograph. So, there's the image of the photo secessionist exhibition at the National Art Club in New York in 1902, which is a very, very famous image, very, very famous exhibition. The image of the exhibition is somewhat famous itself, but it's not a famous photograph, if you would. And then that happens, several other times throughout, when you're showing a picture of a Kodachrome slide, when you're showing a Polaroid camera, when you're showing Ansel Adams taking a photograph rather than an Ansel Adams photograph. So that was this photo secessionist. In all of those cases, you're not obviously seeking to have somebody to get someone to prick them to remember an image. And I certainly would not have been able to identify all of the images, because as you've revealed to me, some of them really were, including the one that's on the cover of the book, images that were personal to you. And, unless one knew you or your extended family, one wouldn't be aware of what the image was. But what I've come to see it now as is that the images very much are sort of exemplars of a particular advance in photography or movement in photography or introduction of a new type of photography, whether that's military surveillance or street photography as it came to develop, or photojournalism, whatever. And that it's now quite easy to have it wash over you and just sort of see the history of photography pass by you, if you would. That's been the change in my experience of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we had, I mentioned that to you in previous conversations. Also, an inspiration for this series was the writing of Susan Sontag. And I thought of my history of photography doesn't include any actual photographs. They're all drawings. And just like the essays by Susan Sontag that are collected on photography don't really have any photographs in them. It's a pure textbook, but they evoke ideas about photography. And the same way I didn't want to show examples of photography, but rather show my ideas about what photography includes.
Right. And then you subsequently, after you completed that body work, you've gone on to do some other works in the series. I don't think we have any of those, which is all right.
Yeah.
But for instance, one of the ones that I perhaps one of my favorite images is the Eggleston Memphis photograph, the very, very famous photograph of the tricycle, and which is, I think, partially because of how graphic the photograph starts to be. Immediately conjures what the image is. But why did you continue to expand on it?
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's a symptom of the 21st century. Nothing ever finishes, or there's no hard stops anymore. And there was always opportunities to show this body of work, but then maybe certain works were not available anymore. And then I just created new ones. I think I'm at a point where I can say I'm not very interested to add on to this history of photography at this moment in this format, just because I've done it for so long. I feel with the work that is on view in Rochester, I've kind of turned a page, and I'm not convinced that I need to go back to this. But for the longest time, it just felt like an arm of my work that can grow along with other aspects.
Sure. So I should just mention that what's up now is Nan and Brian in Bed, which is you created a Lightbox from it, which is currently on exhibition at the Eastman Museum in our Potter Peristyle. And we also have on exhibit the Nan Golden original photograph that was, interestingly enough, when she made this originally, was, as you know, it was a slideshow. So this is from the Ballad of Sexual Dependency, which was a slideshow rather than a set of prints. And she later printed them, but there's an interesting connection, I think, that exists there. And I find it extraordinary because your Lightbox, much more than the watching it on the image on the monitor, recreates the luminescence that exists in the original photograph, and I'm sure existed in the slide when she did the slide.
Yeah, it's I also kind of stumbled onto the format of the Lightbox. I had the opportunity to show this project fairly early on at Art Basel in Miami Beach. And I had planned to just bring my slide projector to Miami and, plug it in and play the slideshow. But then for those of you who have been to this art fair, it's I think there's 50,000 visitors coming in one weekend. A slide projector would be like, it would not have had a major impact. So instead I thought, maybe live up to this moment and make an installation of Lightboxes instead, because the two relate. They all have used transparency, and that was I had never used Lightboxes before, but I showed 16 Lightboxes at Art Basel, and I feel it did what it had to do, for sure.
Okay.
But it was really the first time that I did kind of an installation of 2D, two-dimensional works that were not moving images.
Right. It's interesting that one of the images that you have in the set is from a Jeff Wall piece, which was originally a Lightbox, in fact. And it's interesting because I was sort of looking at the images without trying to avoid looking at the titles. And it was the one that really one of the ones that really challenged me. And I know the Jeff Wall piece, but I think the fact that I wasn't seeing it projected made it harder, because it lost the luminescence that exists. And there's a lot of detail in it too that I think maybe makes it more challenging. But did Jeff Wall's use of the Lightbox have any influence on you?
I remember seeing Jeff Waltz as an art student in the 90s and he kind of owns the format. He's Mr. Lightbox, no doubt. And also to this day, I print my transparencies in Vancouver. The whole Vancouver artist gang uses this format more than any other artist community in the world that I know of. For sure, when anyone uses a Lightbox, you can't get around but thinking of Jeff Wall. But not only because of that, but also because he was more of a conceptual photographer than maybe Winnow Grant or somebody that just tries to capture life on Earth.
Right.
And so I feel I related to his practice, not only with this format that he uses, but also with his approach to the medium of photography.
Great.
More like because he's also thought of as somewhat of a painter in a photographic medium.
Right. I mean, I think he's very much conceptual work, and I mean, he's creating a scene. He's not capturing a scene that exists, and he's not the only one, but he's certainly, used the Lightbox as a very effective tool, I think, in bringing those images to life. So maybe you should go on.
Okay. Oh yeah, here's the cover that you mentioned.
Right. So tell us, if you'd indulge me, tell us the story about this.
Yeah, all right. I mean, maybe opening a can of worms. This image, in comparison to many of the others, is one of the ones that's impossible to recognize. It's based on a personal photograph that was up in my house at the time. The title is Wanda, and it's the mother of my wife at the time, who I never met actually. But this photograph always had kind of a strong presence in our house, and I decided to put it on the cover of the book. And that had, it's because I really like the image, but also because there was some controversy when I showed this project in the beginning that really caught me off guard and also stressed me out, I must admit. This kind of controversy has since then subsided, but not everybody was completely happy about this project. I got a lot of support from people, for example, Jeff Wall. I showed Jeff Wall, I sent Jeff Wall JPEG of the image, and he said, oh, it's very nice, and didn't have anything against it. But I was hesitant about putting something onto the cover that would get me into lawsuits and so forth. So I took one of the less dicey images on the cover. But actually, I really like to live with this choice because it brings up conversations like the ones we're having right now.
Well, it's also fascinating because one doesn't recognize it, and yet it says the history of photography remix. So there's sort of this contradiction that exists at some level. I mean, it's not a contradiction, but it appears to be a contradiction. Yeah. You don't know what's inside yet.
Yeah. The one thing people guess it is Alex Katz. I don't know, maybe because of the female figure.
Yeah,
rural settings. Yeah. And that's a reference that I very much welcome because he's a hero of mine.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I'll let you now take us through some of.
Okay. So you asked me to pick a project that happened in between the past, the history of photography, and the current moment, and I just pulled a few images from this series. This is a frame from Battleship Potemkin by Sergei Eisenstein that I also utilized in a project. I turned it into a series of ink drawings. It never became an animation, but it's also a book published by the Emily Carr University in Vancouver. And then This is the one time where I also tried to be an actual photographer, and I created a photo shoot where we restaged the shots by Eisenstein with live actors. This is the San Francisco beloved writer Kevin Killian, who sadly passed away last year, acting as the protagonist in this remake of the Odessa staircase sequence. And this is another set of these drawings based on the Odessa staircase sequence that I made. I redrew every cut from this very famous film montage. And I must say that there were a few exhibitions associated with this project, and I never thought that the exhibitions did what I wanted them to do. But I'm still very happy that I did this project, because I think it kind of set up the work that I'm doing currently. This was done in 2008, I believe, and was the first time that I used ink instead of digital media to produce my images. And then also, here's another one of these remakes of the step sequence. This was done on the roof of the San Francisco Art Institute with a lot of students and friends who wanted to help recreate the Sergei Eisenstein sequence.
And of course, the Eisenstein sequence is a very important in the history of cinema, but also in the history of art. Francis Bacon repeatedly used the bullet through the eyeglass, if you would, or the eyeglass broken with a bullet, shattered with a bullet in his Pope paintings, his Velázquez paintings based on the Velázquez painting. But also, even in just popular cinema, it was an extraordinarily influential.
And
this particular scene was very influential.
Every film student and every film history student has to watch the sequence over and over. So it's almost embarrassing that I gravitate towards these super well-known film sequences, maybe the film sequence of the early 20th century. But then I also like that viewers can make connections like you just did to the work of Francis Bacon, or to time they spent in college, or I feel it connects to so many things. I feel that this sequence really deserves its fame.
Yeah.
And then a very late addition to this project was this piece of found footage, which looks very much like the Sergei Eisenstein scene, but it's from a protest that happened in the early 60s in San Francisco, at San Francisco City Hall, where a group of UC Berkeley students protested a meeting of the House Un-American Activities Committee at City Hall in San Francisco. And you asked me to bring the original footage, so
if you would, I just found the footage to be extraordinary.
Yeah,
and
it's
timely.
playing without sound. Yeah, it's uncanny how similar it is to the Eisenstein film, with civilians being violently forced down a staircase. But it's also uncanny how much it relates to the current moment, where we have the clashes between protesters and police in the United States. So it's one of these clashes that happened in cinema in the early 20th century, and then in the 60s, and then today as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's just extraordinary to see. We've seen more disturbing footage recently of police interaction with citizens, but this is quite remarkable from obviously a different time and in a different context. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it very much. And that brings us now to your work, National Anthem, which is currently being featured at Deborah Ronnen Fine Art at R1 Studios on University Avenue, not that far from the Eastman Museum. This is the work that was in the Whitney Biennial, I guess, in 2018, and was highly acclaimed critically. If you talk about it, one of the things that I find very compelling about it is your use of watercolor.
Yeah, maybe we should just watch it.
Sure.
Yeah, okay, you wanted me to talk. I don't know.
Well, first, I mean, it seems to be. I don't think it's necessary to ask why you were drawn to this issue, so I'm not going to ask you that question. But technically, we talked in the past about how you created this, and you're using a set of watercolors, but if you could describe the technique you used to create the digital work.
Yeah, I'm not a trained animator, so all the animation processes that I use are completely made up. And so basically I'm creating this digitally, like I did the History of Photography remix, and then I print these images onto paper, trace them onto watercolor paper with graphite paper, and then color them in. And to create this kind of illusion of motion, I draw actually every image 3 times and play through them. That creates this kind of shimmering effect that you saw. And it's really like a physical act. It's very laborious, but it's also the joy of making it. Thinking of these, a lot of thinking goes into coming up with the idea and the concept for the piece, but the actual making of it is really I heard Martin Puryear once talk about blue collar artists and white collar artists. I'm definitely a blue collar artist. It's like working in a shop. So I come here at 9 in the morning and I work until the afternoon before I go home. And and it's the joy. It's a physical labor.
And you said, I think when we talked about it before, that you actually made 3 sets of watercolors, 3 watercolors for each image that you were going to use.
Exactly. Yeah.
That you printed out. And then you would sort of go back and forth between them to even out the variation, I think you said, among the different watercolors to have it be not totally flat the way some of your work is in terms of totally even, but have some, but not also be as uneven as watercolor is inherently. And that then you found when you used the 3 that it was a little jump, if you would, so that you actually created intermediate images between them that were combinations of the 2 watercolors that you were transitioning between.
Yeah, it gets very technical. It's but yeah, I came up with this formula that works, that I feel is kind of the right amount of stimulation for the eye, but without becoming too aggressive that it becomes stroboscopic or unpleasant to watch.
Right. I think for me, there's something. Well, it's a very moving work for me personally, but I think there's something about there being watercolor based that enhances that experience for me personally. I don't know that for anyone else.
Yeah, I feel, you know, the subject of this film, the protests by the NFL players, doesn't necessarily call for this execution in watercolor. And I sometimes think it's actually more helpful for an artwork if the content is kind of in conflict with the format or the form than when they go like hand in hand. And I think this kind of discrepancy between this very old technique of watercolor and this very contemporary image created something that people can connect with. So it's not only also that the artwork is not only the container for a subject, like, but also that it gives you a new way to experience the work that you have, or the idea or the subject.
Right, and then this is just again, this is not a statement on behalf of other people. It's just it feels more humanistic because it's a watercolor than or they're watercolor based than it might with the other medium. But that's, again, as I said, that's just sort of my take on it. I should mention that what's shown right now on the screen is from the Deborah Ronnen gallery exhibition. That was the video, and then this is one of the light boxes. And then here are a number of the watercolors, and in the center, one of the light boxes. I've been to the show several times. It's very, very worth going to see. And I'll just mention it's open Thursdays through Saturdays, 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. And I think is closing. Bear with me 1 second. I just want to see if I can make sure I get this right. It closes November 7th. So you have some time, but not a lot of time. So I urge people who are in the area to go. And then I don't know how we're doing on time. Maybe what we should do is go to Q&A at this point, if that's all right with you.
Sounds great.
Nick?
Hello. All right. A question came in. Would you please talk about the photographers who walk out of the screen several times?
Okay, yeah, this is, and I think the question refers to the National Anthem video.
I believe
Yes.
that.
I mean, obviously, the animation is based on television footage, and obviously, there is more motion in the original footage than in my animation, but people pretty much during the National Anthem stand still. And I found that the only people who actually move around are the cameramen. So I recreated the movement of these cameramen. But to me, they're very important to the overall experience of this piece, because this is the only part where you see this kind of frame by frame character animation. And they also somehow activate the edges of the frame and the edges of the video. So I'm glad that whoever posed this question noticed them, because they were a lot of work to make, and I hold them dearly.
Yeah. An early question that came in was, are these images created digitally or are they painted? I believe this was in reference to the History of Photography remix.
I mean, they are created digitally, but I use tablet and draw them. It's not necessarily like freehand drawing. The technical term is vector drawing, computer vector drawing. And for those of you who haven't done it, it feels a little bit like cutting something out of scissors. That's why the shapes are more rounded than a free drawn line. Yeah, it's a process that I've used for many times. It's almost like a daily meditation to me to create these digital drawings. And they lie underneath the watercolors and everything else I do.
That's a great segue to the next question. What watercolors do you use?
Okay. If give me 1 second, I'll show them to you. They're just around the corner. I'll be right back.
Kota is in his studio right now, if you all couldn't tell.
Okay, here I am again. So I started out with a traditional watercolor set like this. With, you know, pens and so forth. This is really what it's more like a European style of watercolor painting. And because I started this project when I was in Germany in 2017, but then in the United States, people use this kind of tubular form for watercolor. So this is what I'm using at the moment. I prefer the European style watercolors. So I actually transfer these into the pans and then I paint out of these. This is the answer. And I use brushes.
You work directly and very much inside the American cultural landscape. What is your orientation to European political, cultural happenings?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I gravitated already to, you must know that American culture is kind of a global culture. We've all grown up. I was a teenager in the 80s. We all grew up on Madonna, Prince, and Michael Jackson, no matter whether you grew up in Asia or in Europe so American culture is definitely something global. But I must say, I also always gravitated towards the United States. I'm of mixed ethnicity. I'm half Asian, half European. And I never felt completely at home or at ease in either culture. And this kind of melting pot cultural diversity is something that's just kind of ingrained in American culture, especially in a place like the Bay Area where I live. So that's why I feel very comfortable in this culture. That said, I still, after having lived here for 20 years, I still feel like a foreigner. And that's why I'm maybe also less shy to tackle these big themes like the national anthem or so. I think Americans would almost be like, that's been talked about a little bit too much, but I feel no hesitation to grapple with the big subjects that this country faces.
Do you feel any connection to graphic novels? They had they went on, maybe it's the German connection, but I wonder if there is a connection to Art Spiegelman.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I like those guys, and I've never been a big, I mean, I read them like many people have, but more, I would say, philosophically than practically. I was never a comic book or manga addict that read them like day and night. But that said, I very much respect what they do. I feel it's almost kind of like random who ends up in the art world and who ends up in the comic world. Now there's a lot of crossover. Art Crumb and I think also Art Spiegelman now have gallery shows, and but my work, even though it has a kind of visual closeness to comics, I've never been approached by a graphic novel publisher if I wanted to publish my drawings in a graphic novel form. So I just admire them from afar, I guess.
Is that something you think you'd be interested in if you were approached?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't. I would never say never. I actually, one of my collaborators and studio assistants is a graphic novel artist, and I respect so much what she does. I don't see a hierarchy either. I think a good graphic novel is as culturally valuable as a good museum show. There's no I don't think one is a kind of lesser territory. I just, yeah, if it happened, I would not say no, but I don't seek it out either.
With the National Anthem piece, you know, you said that you felt comfortable taking on, to an extent, you felt comfortable taking on these kind of big issues that maybe a lot of Americans wouldn't. Did you get any pushback or any negative criticism regarding that?
Oh yeah. I mean, if you show something at the Whitney Biennial, you'll definitely, there's so much reaction to this show that you're always going to get a range. And I would say the vast majority of responses were very positive, but there were negative ones. There were some negative ones that I was kind of happy about because they were just kind of politically motivated. It wasn't about the work. I felt it was about what's going on in the work, and they felt were against that, and I can't do anything about that. Mm-hmm. It's a divisive, I mean, what's going on in the video, to a lot of liberal-minded people, there is kind of consensus that what these players was doing was heroic and brave. But if you look at the country as a whole, these protests were and still are divisive. There was actually something that happened after the Whitney, is that a sportswear company printed a billboard based on one of the watercolors and put it on Instagram, and they got, I think, hundreds and thousands of angry comments, just because, yeah, it's a divisive protest.
Do you feel like the response to the work is informing kind of your next move forward, or what the work that you're currently working on?
I think yeah, it definitely, to me, really the whole game of being an artist is almost like playing ping pong with the viewer. You know, I don't do this work just for myself. I do this work because I want to share it with others. And then also, I think the viewer really completes the work. The reactions that viewers, or the experiences that viewers have with the work, is as important as what I'm doing. And I'm not there to please everyone, and I'm not there to but I learn from every time, from every opportunity that I get to share this work.
Well, we wish that you could be here in Rochester to see the work here. It's unfortunate you weren't able to join us, but we are really excited to have it here and share it with the community. That is it for questions. So I think we can go ahead and wrap up here. Thank you, Kota, so much for joining us. Thank you, Bruce, for leading the conversation today. And again, Bruce, do you have any thing that you want to plug or wrap up with?
No, I'll just say again that it's actually, I think, a very special moment in Rochester, that there are 3 different institutions that are collaborating and showing significant work. And particularly the National Anthem work is extraordinarily powerful. And so I would just encourage people, there aren't that many days left. I'd encourage people to take the opportunity to see the work. You know, all of these time-based media works, it's, you know, it isn't like certain paintings where you can rely on always having an opportunity to see them at certain museums. These are available to be seen the way they should be seen, and then they're not. And so you should seize the opportunity. And Kota, I just want to thank you. It's been a pleasure today. And it was a pleasure talking to you before. I learned a great deal from it.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks very much for having me, and wish I could see the show. And yeah, a great privilege to have my work included in your exhibitions in Rochester.
Thank you, Kota.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to everybody who logged in for today's talk. We actually have a talk tomorrow afternoon at 1 o'clock. You can check out our website. It's going to be a presentation by Heather Shannon, Associate Curator in the Department of Photography. Heather Shannon is going to be talking about the history of spirit photography. And there's going to be some live demonstrations by one of our historic process specialists, Nick Brandreth. And he's a bit of a showman, so I think you'd be in for a real treat if you've got the time available. So thanks to everybody, and the recording of this will be up on our YouTube page in a few weeks. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Nick.